dear people, dear guests, I am happy that you are here and you would like to listen more about digital threats and opportunities in the election, or rather to know results who will be Biden or Trump, because we have a competing panel devoted to this issue. This panel is organized by CHESNO Civil Movement. CHESNO is Ukrainian political watchdog organization. We were established in 2012, and now this team of 25 people, and we're focusing on monitoring of parliament, party finance, and also on monitoring election. In 2019, it was first time that CHESNO was monitoring elections, but now we are doing a lot in terms of monitoring of digital platforms, analyzing party financial reports. So probably we are one of the strongest players in Ukraine in that area. So when we were designing this panel, the idea was to unite representatives from different sectors and to show their view on threats and opportunity which bring digital component to the elections. Today, we will have three distinguished guests. We have Magnus Oman. Magnus is a director of Regional Europe Office and senior political finance advisor to IFES, and IFES is International Foundation for Electoral System. Also, we have Anita Bedhere. She's the head of Strategic Analysis Division in KNAP from Latvia. And we will, one of the speakers from Meta, Oskar Brzezinski, he will join us in 10 minutes, and he will be presenting and talking to us via Zoom. So, why we have this panel? First of all, we have a lot of challenges which are coming. This year, about 1 billion people will be participating in elections. So we will have elections in different continents. They will be electing presidents, MPs, local councillors. But there are a lot of threats regarding that, because many countries are under authoritarian regime. So that's a big threat. Also, the digital component, it became now significant in the elections. It may significantly influence the results, and we know a lot of scandals which happened in the recent years. Also, appearance on the artificial intelligence and its use during electoral campaign. We know what's happening in India and all those challenges which AI is posting to the elections. There are, except of that, some legislative challenges, because we know how the third parties can influence the elections, and government not always want to limit this influence, and this is area where money can be hidden also. So we have a lot of challenges, but we have a lot of successes. When the platforms demonstrate their transparency, and the civil society is working on that, and the law enforcement body are strengthening that cooperation, we can achieve good result. One example I can give you from Ukraine, when in 2019 Facebook opened library to Ukraine, CHESNO started to monitor politicians' spending on the Facebook platform, and during the presidential election, over 1% of the total campaign funds were reported as spendings on the internet advertising. But when we started monitoring this, when the NPC started to issue the protocols, so parties and players understood that this zone is properly watched, they started to report. And when we had a parliament election in summer, this share increased from 1% to almost 10%. It shows that this cooperation of stakeholders, it may give a significant result. So we have a lot of successes, but still there are some issues. And I would like to make this panel a bit dynamic. So we have short round of question, and we have also longer round of question where you can share your expertise and your vision of the issue. And afterwards, we may have questions from the audience for you to reply. So I will start from short question to Magnus. Magnus, what digital threats to election you can see, and do you see any country-specific trends, or it's worldwide?
Thank you, Ida. I think first of all, we need to recognize that elections are very complex endeavors that involve a large number of stakeholders. EMBs, election management bodies, political parties, civil society, various government agencies, media, etc. And this engagement involves a lot of data flows between stakeholders. That's support business processes of elections. And this is necessary to enable work that is across the entirety of the election cycle. But then that includes digital threats. A central concept in cybersecurity that is also relevant for elections is the attack surface. So all the ways that a threat actor can compromise the confidentiality of an electoral process, to get at the process, get at the availability of information for the process. And largely, this attack surface includes both physical and digital threats, is subject to all type of cybersecurity risks that we see elsewhere. They're not specific to elections, ransomware attacks, phishing leading to the takeover of accounts, in this case by election officials, compromising public-facing infrastructure like the website of the Election Commission, which is very important to make sure that it is secure, results management systems, reporting portals. And we can think of this as a spectrum from kind of minor things, mischief, to medium malice, to proper mayhem. And on the low end, on the mischief side, voter registration data is fairly often stolen. And fairly often that has just kind of random, it happens to be on a laptop that a thief is taking, or a hard drive or a USB stick, or a third-party vendor who is storing this data in a way that is not secure. On the mid-range, we see ransomware attacks, other cyber criminal activities that are serious, but not specifically attacked at election commissions or election structures. They happen to be the target this time. It can be someone else the next time. This is happening. This is happening quite a lot. We had the ransomware attack on the election commission in Pakistan last year. 2 months ago, there was a ransomware attack on an election unit in the US. That was on a county level. The 2022 elections on the election commission in the UK. And then at the high end, we have sophisticated attacks that involve state-level resources. Full spectrum operations with targeted attacks, information operations, and various missions to actually affect the election outcome, so specific to elections. And such activities we've seen in, for example, previous federal elections in the US, and we are very concerned about what they're talking about, the other panel over there, the upcoming elections in the US, and the digital threats that we are facing for that. Other main threats that we want to talk about is disinformation, obviously. Disinformation approaches and tactics are evolving, but I think the threats are the same, the goals are the same as they've been for a long time. Undermining the trust in the electoral process. We see that spreading as an approach, but it is the same approach as we've seen in many other parts of the world in the past. Undermining democracy, polarizing society, and serving the geopolitical goals of particular state actors and other actors to undermine democracy. And the final point I make, because a lot of us don't understand technology incredibly well, I would add myself to that list, it opens for bad faith attacks on election integrity, also where there is no actual evidence or where the technology is actually well managed and it is actually secure. So we've seen this in the US, but we've also seen it in Kenya, in Nigeria, in Brazil, and other places in recent elections, where agreed stakeholders, or those who didn't win the election, are bringing court cases alleging various types of malfeasance as just a reflexive political tactic, and indeed in bad faith.
Thank you, Magnus. I think the issue of electronic voting is still one of the, I don't know, discussable, let's say. So, Annika, what kind of digital threats do you see from your perspective?
Oh, well, talking about the region, I'm representing Latvia, so the same region as Lithuania. The main threat that we face is misinformation. And we did a little research back home just to make sure whether the use of new technology, the digital technology, artificial intelligence, will, how to say, pay off to include in generating this misinformation. We took the results of previous election we had in Latvia. It was parliament election, and it was the with the highest participation rate. It was 2 years ago, and we splitted the voters in different groups. And particularly, we watched two groups where one of them was approximately, roughly calculated, 5% of voters. It was 18 and 19 years old, like youngsters. It was their first elections, and approximately 20% were 65 plus, which is more or less retirement age. And these two groups are like more exposed to this misinformation because one group is unexperienced and the other one may be non-offense, but start to lose the focus on details. And we overlapped with different data, which was the survey 1 week before this election, where 25% of respondents were undecided about whom they want to vote. So to sum up, we see that at least 1/3 of the voters are more or less easily, how to say, switched or can be affected. And the conclusion was that yes, if the political parties, candidates, or third parties or neighboring countries, if they want to use technologies or artificial intelligence, then they can influence particularly this 1/3, and it will crucially change the result of the election. So answering your question, the threat is there.
The main threat is disinformation. Yes. Okay. Victoria, will you tell me when the Oscar join us? So. Hello, Oscar.
Can you hear me? I'm sorry, I was not so sure whether you can hear me properly.
Yeah, we can see you and we can hear you. So I have a short question to you. What digital threats to election you see, and are they country specific, or you can see some general trends?
Right. First of all, good afternoon, everyone, and I'm really sorry I cannot be with you in person. It's been a very intense period for the last couple of weeks, and it continues to be. So I'm really sorry for that. But of course, we as Meta are absolutely committed to collaborate with civil society, with many organizations that are observing elections, and just to make sure that the integrity of the elections, as they also they are inherently touching also our platforms are properly secured. To your question, I think we live in the moment of of a certain framework to approach elections, really, and the framework I'll generally describe as a risk-based approach, right? Either whenever we take any regulatory attempts to regulate the way how platforms work around the elections, or whenever we take some best practices that are being developed and promoted also by great partners like IFES represented here, I think risk-based approach is something that is really forcing all the actors that are somehow close to the electoral process to analyze risks for each and every electoral cycle. And of course, there will be a degree to which elections are similar and they can carry similar risks. The abuse of political ads is definitely one of them. I know that this panel is specifically looking into these aspects. But of course, we live in the world that is extremely fluid when it comes to the political sphere, and that is why the real-time monitoring and the risk-based approach, meaning the approach that really starts with a risk assessment first and then taking appropriate measures against the risk assessments, is something that is of utmost importance. To be very practical about it, this year we of course face an unprecedented number of elections worldwide. Half of the global population will go to the polls, right? We're halfway through that year, more or less. And I think, of course, there are some systemic risks that we always observe as a platform, and that's why we try to build more and more measures and make sure that these specific risks are mitigated. Just to quote a couple of recent developments. So one of the policies that we actually introduced very early this year was geared towards making sure that specific instances where generative AI technology is being used to generate creative elements of political, electoral, or social issue ads, that whenever that happens in specific circumstances, there is a very hard requirement to label that and make it super transparent, along with numerous other elements of our ads transparency ecosystem to the public. But again, it's just one of the many interventions that we are introducing to our ecosystem, just to make sure that the systemic risks of the abuse of attempts to manipulate are being taken care of. Now, this risk landscape will also differ, country by country and region by region, mainly because we see differentiated, cultural norms in the way how the public debate, of course, is being carried out, right? And that is why, even though we maintain, for instance, global standards for our content moderation, I love this, is super transparently described in our community standards, we also, try to always factor the local context and make sure that whenever we moderate content, we very often, take a deeper assessment and make sure that we have also appropriate resources to carry out the deeper assessment and factor that local context. So I'm pretty sure that in a later stage of that panel we'll have a chance to explore some of the specific elements of this risks that we are facing. I think Gen AI technology and its application is definitely heavily debated, but let's not forget about the fact that however the message is generated, whether with the use of Gen AI or not, its moderation should be attempted with a very similar norms, right? Equally harmful can be the message that is generated with Gen AI technology and not. And I think it's an important area to remember that whatever norms or technologies we create, they should still apply, across the spectrum of the way how the content on also platforms like ours is generated. More and more, we're looking also into the all possible attempts to manipulate public debate. And of course, in our platforms, this would usually manifest in the context of what we call CAB, coordinating authentic behavior networks. Very transparently, all these disruption of these networks are actually reported in our quarterly adversarial threat reports. And I think there have been a couple of networks that we've disrupted and reported transparently in the recent edition of that report. And we see more and more that, we face both these networks being set up and operated within specific country and across countries, right? And here really, for those who observe electoral processes, it's very clear that risks can come both, in a kind of endogenous and exogenous sort of with both of those dynamics or tactics. I'll stop here, but I hope that was, a relevant context to the overall discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Oscar. Thank you for posting these very important risks. Now, I would like to ask Magnus. You told us about different level of threats you see, like from micro, meso, and macro. I understood them like this. But what strategies to mitigate these digital threats do you see?
Thank you. Yeah. We should start by recognizing, I think, that the democracy and elections community has come pretty far already in increasing its capacity. 5 years ago, a lot of election commissions would say, maybe I should have an election integrity strategy, or maybe we should have an information integrity approach. Quite a number of EMBs, not least in Europe, have reached or come closer to maturity in that regard. There's a lot of room to grow, but EMBs are at least on board with the idea that they have a role to play in defending elections and the perception of elections, as well as the information that goes around elections. Effective strategies to counter digital threats during elections largely embrace proactive goals of building and strengthening trust in the process, communicating in ways that make election processes seem understandable and seem trustworthy. And there are various aspects of this, and I'll talk about some of them. This includes building networks of stakeholders and validators in civil society. Also, people who don't work with election processes generally, community groups, sports groups, popular culture, media, who can amplify credible information from election officials and various other groups and reach their own audiences, their own communities. We have the issue of crisis communication planning, how to respond in advance, how to plan to how to respond, if you will, when misleading information comes up about elections. It's been happening probably increasingly frequently, and responding in ways that are timely and appropriate, and that do not further deepen distrust, which can certainly happen if you do it wrong. This involves basic things like voter education, voter information. It's difficult, it's context dependent, but where culturally appropriate, officials that have embraced more informal, more digitally appropriate messages and modes of communication have had great success, we see, in expanding the reach and bolstering their institutional reputations in managing elections. Taiwan and Australia are being mentioned as examples of where commissions and other entities have been able to do this. Then there is the engagement between technology companies and electoral stakeholders, and the role that the work of technology companies that we've just started hearing about, and we'll hear more about, play in the electoral process. So IFES has spearheaded the voluntary election integrity guidelines for technology companies, which are built to meaningfully connect technology companies and the elections community to support electoral integrity. And among the technology companies that have expressed support for these guidelines is Meta, that we've been hearing from and we'll hear more from. These voluntary election integrity guidelines for technology companies, they were launched in March this year in the Summit for Democracy, and they establish a framework for meaningful engagement between election authorities and technology companies, and to establish clear policies and processes for sharing information around elections and ensuring that voters have access to high-quality information by improving communication between the electoral actors and reducing barriers to supporting election integrity for smaller and newer companies, which is another important issue. We have the very big companies, but there are a lot of different actors involved in the digital level in elections. So more than 40 election authorities, civil society groups, and technology companies have signed on to support these guidelines. And IFES is leading the efforts to expand the coalition, to strengthen accountability around those principles, and work with election authorities and technology companies to translate the guidelines into real-world impact. If you want to know more, type in electionsandtech, one-word.org. And you will get much more information about that. I also want to highlight some key findings from research we did and we published last year on electoral cybersecurity, a guide for donor program development. That was done in consultation with DAI and USAID Center for Democracy, Human Rights and Governance. And the research shows that cybersecurity in elections is threatened if election management bodies do not have strong information technology management practices. So some of the activities we identified as required for countering digital threats include these. So support efforts to promote robust regulatory frameworks. So we need the legislation in place that supports and at least not hinders effective strategies against digital threats. Promote and support the training and technical assistance to build cybersecurity capacity among EMB staff and other stakeholders, including technical staff, including volunteers. And that's a bit that's very often forgotten. Most elections in most countries are primarily run by volunteers, at least at the local level. That can create potential digital attack areas and threat risks. Strategic planning that integrates life cycle approach of the entire electoral cycle, builds cybersecurity into the technology implementation, help EMBs in cost-effective and transparent procurement policies when it comes to technology, when appropriate, help to procure secure technology for EMBs, also support EMBs to build robust internal audit capabilities so they can evaluate their own digital setup, support external audits as well on EMB's cybersecurity policies, procedures, practices. As an example, and there are many, IFES has HEAT, that's the holistic exposure and adaptation testing. So that's a testing system that allows to secure automated or digitalized electoral processes against unanticipated threats, illicit incursions, system failures, or just unfounded legal challenges. Finally, two things: support strategic communication capabilities around cybersecurity, have a plan for how you'll communicate if something goes wrong digitally. If the website of the Commission goes down, what are we supposed to do? And then to implement that effectively. And the final point is to support development of communities of practice, of fund networking opportunities, so that IT staff in election management bodies within the same region or globally can come together and learn from each other about the different challenges that they face and the challenges and the solutions being developed by the technology sector. And another IFES example, we are supporting the Cyber and Information Resilience Elections Network called SIREN, used to be called ECRN. So it's essential that to make concerted efforts to meet the digital threats, both to ensure the integrity of elections, perception of elections, and indeed the safety of election officials and those working for the integrity of democracy and elections. Thanks.
Thank you. But I've got the feeling that we are developing new legislation, we are platforms like Meta developing some new norms, but politicians are always ahead. I agree with that.
Politicians and threat actors. There are people who want to make mischief, and they are always, if we are here, they are there. Yeah.
So we are developing legislation just after that happened. And the next cycle, they do not need this technology anymore than trying something different.
Which is why elections can only ever be part of the solution. Legislation should be encouraging solutions, not creating the solutions to these challenges.
Okay, so we are moving to the next question, and it would be a short question. We can start from Latvia. And what do you think? Is it possible to regulate third-party intervention to the electoral process?
By government, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, of course, it's possible. The question is how effective it is and what the results will be. But more or less, it all comes back to the financing. You can regulate by putting some kind of restriction, how much money the third part can spend on the campaign. But now we see, with all the artificial intelligence and other solutions, there is more or less no money at all involved. So it's, I would say it's not possible, not possible, but complicated.
Okay. Oscar, are you with us?
I'm absolutely with you, yes.
Yeah, okay. So what digital platforms like Meta can do to eliminate impact of third parties to the electoral campaigning?
Right, so I'm also happy to drive you through our all integrity measures, but just to address this question in the substance, I think there are two components to this answer. So one is really to bring as much transparency as possible, right? And I think we've been working very hard for the last really years, definitely since 2017, there has been a drastic change in the way how we start approaching it, to bring more and more transparency to what's happening around the elections on our platforms, but not only around the elections, but generally around the political, electoral, or social issue communication. So transparency is one of these components, and I'll develop in a second, what we really do to, elevate the bar for the transparency and make sure that it's not only, it's not only creating ecosystems for this transparency on platforms, but it's really making it easy for the user to benefit from that transparency ecosystem. And secondly is to also empower our partners like civil society, like electoral management bodies, to be more and more equipped with the right tools, knowledge, experiences as well, in order to monitor the situation on our platforms, right? Of course, it goes without saying that it's very much also related to the quality and efficiency within which we moderate content on our platforms. But, I'll spare it for later, but obviously it's a super important component, and that is why periodically we also release the Community Standards Enforcement Report, where we also transparently report on these measures. But let me quickly focus on these two first components. So transparency ecosystem. These days, we're actually thinking of main two areas. It starts from the transparency for political, electoral, and social issue ads. As some of you may already know, we really defined a pretty broad catalog for pieces of advertising that are required to carry additional information, even though these days, as a result of the regulatory measures like DSA, we actually store all the ads that are being displayed in the territory of the European Union for 1 year. We store them in the ad library with a couple of important details, and require everyone to provide transparent information about the payer and the beneficiary. However, the catalog of political, electoral, and social issue ads is actually such a special ad category, as we define it really on the platform as a special ad category, for which we require much more details and much more, I would say, robust authorization procedure to happen, right? So just to begin with, political ads are defined relatively broadly on the platform. It is either ads that are created by active political person or ads that contain political messages. Electoral ads are defined relatively narrowly. It's basically everything that relates to elections, when they are happening, what is the electoral process, who is on a ballot, who can vote, and so on and so forth. And social issue ads are actually may differ territory by territory. In some territories we enforce them, in some not. But for the European Union and many other countries, including also Ukraine, where we introduced social issue ads in March this year, it's really a catalog of several topics like immigration policies, health policies, access to weapons, economic policies, and many, many others that, when discussed, are actually subject to the same authorization regime. And authorization that we require from advertisers is really a three-step process by which everyone needs to confirm their identity so that we are 100% sure that we are dealing with the real person. Then it goes through creating a disclaimer that can have these days two distinct forms, but basically the idea of a disclaimer is to really disclose who is behind these ads, and then all of this is blending together with an array of details in our ad library, which is a publicly searchable database that is allowing everyone to search through these ads to get the idea of like how much budget was spent for a specific piece of ad, how it was targeted, because these days, since 2022, we actually also report on not only on the exposed sort of picture of what happened, right? So like how many people were reached, in which regions, and how much money was spent, and so on, but also on the ex ante picture, meaning we also report transparently at the page level, at the aggregated level, on what kind of targeting categories were used to publish these ads. But for vetted researchers, we also report this at the ad level. So targeting is an equally important detail that we very transparently report. This year, we'll also introduce another label, which is something that I already alluded to earlier, which is the label that is supposed to label the content that for electoral, social issue, political ads has been created with the use of Gen AI techniques, and for instance is creating a photorealistic description of an event that did not happen, or photorealistic representation of person that does not exist, and so on and so forth.
Thank you, Oscar. I should stop you here.
Yeah, just one more sentence, if I may, right? So transparency is really the ecosystem perspective that we maintain a number of technological interventions. But it's on its own, it's not doing the right job. It's really the partnerships, the education, and a couple of other recommendations that are very well defined in IFES, actually, recommendations for tech platforms that really help to bring this to life. I can comment on that later on, but just wanted to complement with that perspective.
Yeah, thank you. We had our own experience as an NGO with the Meta during elections in 2009. So our advertisement with information about candidates, a party, was considered as a political ad. We had very tough pre-moderation, and it was not so easy to launch the advertisement, and it was really costly in comparison to other advertisement. But at the same time, so-called media, I'm saying so-called because the pages were recently created, they were posting a lot of ads in favor of some political parties and candidates, and that wasn't considered as a political ads. So that, for us, it was challenging, and this third-party intervention was actually not included in any Facebook library. So I hope this changed, because 2019 it was far, far away, but that's our own experience.
So just to quickly comment on that, we maintain the ecosystem and its rules equitable for everyone. So regardless whether you're media, NGO, political party, or whoever it is, like the rules are the same, right? I'm not aware of a specific case, but definitely we do improve the quality within which our classifiers work, right? And whenever it's actually something that is, in line with our political, social, electoral arts, should be treated with the same authorization regime.
Thank you, Oscar. Magnus, what should we do with third party? There is any chance to regulate it or to stop it? Because from my side, I see that participation of third party is increasing, and we can't even predict who can become the third party on the next round of the elections.
Well, the approach taken by the vast majority of countries is very clear. That's to ignore the issue completely. I can have some understanding for why the situation is like that. Like you said, it is increasing. It's not new, but it is increasing. And we know that legal reform is very slow in these areas. And then this issue of capacity, I'll get back to that. But this lack of regulations specifically on this issue does create significant gaps in democracy and in transparency in the funding. I think practical examples, we do know that the Alternative für Deutschland, the political party in Germany, is one illustration. Very significant part of the funding on behalf of that party doesn't go through the party. And therefore, we have no idea where that money came from. We don't know how it was being spent. This is very scary. If we have an idea of how party financing functioned in Germany a century ago, we all know where that led. I want to stress there are two main risks in terms of, we said third party, we tend to call it non-contestant campaigning. It's just a little bit more specific. One is where contestants, so parties or candidates, use this approach to bypass existing regulations. So if there's a limit on how much they can spend, they create a fake NGO and they have them spend the money, or they receive the funding, etc., etc. This is what the Americans call coordinated funding or coordinated campaign activities. But then there is the other side, which is that authoritarian or malign actors, without any coordination with parties or candidates, spend money on election campaigns, either to support contestants that they feel will be favorable to them, even if they don't even talk to that party necessarily, or is generally to undermine confidence in the electoral process. So this is independent, non-coordinated spending, but it still brings significant corruption risks. And of course, foreign spending is a major part of this. So I said most countries ignore the issue, from a regulatory perspective anyway. Outside of Europe, very rare. US is one example. In Europe, Latvia is one case, but in Europe it is Latvia, Czech Republic, Ireland, and the UK. That's it. I'm not going to comment on Latvia, and the other three, it's not working that great, the systems. Its more common approach is to ban this completely. And that makes sense. So we say, if you're not a party, if you're not a contestant, you're not a party, you're not a candidate, you're not nominating people, you're not allowed to spend money. It's very straightforward, but highly problematic. And I strongly advocate against it. If in the European case situation, first of all, we know that the rulings by the European Court of Human Rights, not specifically on this, but on related issues relating to third-party campaigning, their rulings seem to clearly indicate that it's okay to regulate it, but not to ban it. I am pretty certain that if a case of a ban on non-contestant campaigning is brought to the European Court of Human Rights, it will be struck down as a violation of Article 10 of the European Convention of Human Rights, freedom of expression. But even if we ignore that, even if we go outside of Europe, it's not a good idea, because it's very unlikely to work, and it is a violation, arguably, it is a violation against the freedom of expression by individuals. So, and this points to a general risk in trying to regulate the campaigning by contestants, which is that it risks reducing free speech, especially by civil society. And we have enough of those efforts in the world as it is. So I'm not arguing against the regulation of non-contestant campaigning, but I am saying that if a country or government is attempting to do it, they have to do it very carefully. And then finally, if you introduce rules on non-contestant campaigning, you pretty much double the burden for the oversight institution. If that is CNAB, if that is NACP in Ukraine, if that is whatever institution it is, you have to look at the financing of parties and candidates, and now all of a sudden you also have to look at the financing of all the others. That can be the same volume. In some countries it's less, in some countries it's getting up to 2/3. In the US cases, it seems to be an awful large part of it. So that means that rules on non-contestant campaigning will fail unless you match it with a huge amount of money and resources to the oversight institutions. And what Oscar was saying, the role of civil society, the role of media is exceptionally important in this area to monitor and make public campaigning by non-contestant campaigners. And as we talk about digital solutions, technology can play a very important role in this, in allowing for automated monitoring of campaign activities by non-contestants as well as by contestants.
Thank you, Magnus. Anit, we heard a lot about how progressive Latvia is in different aspects, but could you please say what innovation can government or oversight institution use to deal with these digital challenges?
Well, I will use an ancient saying that every coin has two sides. So the same here. One part is that, yes, government can allocate resources, can use innovations and high-tech solutions. But the other question is about the willingness of the voters to use this solution that the government will provide. So to make it efficient, I would say that you have to try to find the balance between the two sides. And in Latvia, we, monitored the habits of the society and common population, the potential voters, and the solution that we came up with was that in this digital era, the smartphones are the number one thing for everyone, and the amount of apps that we have on our phones. So what we did, we introduced the app for mobile phones, where anybody, any participant of the society, can report about misconducts or other things that they see, and we receive this information faster, and we can react faster. But again, to fully answer this question, we also have to divide the process itself. So the one innovative solution should be for the pre-election stage, where the campaigning period goes. The other solution for the election day, where there is a silent period. And the third one for the post-election phase, where all the results are being calculated and all the statistics are being performed. So for this campaigning stage, our app works very fine. We also go with the educational part, as Oskars mentioned, which is also very crucial. We educate the society what are the signs of these misconducts, or, for example, there is some kind of restrictions in legislation that if the political party issue the magazines, distributing it by the post, you should write the amount of the magazine printed. So if you're like drinking your morning coffee and get the magazines from your post box, and you see that there is no mark about how many exemplars were printed, you can take a photo, upload via app, and we will receive this information. We have like the proof, and then we can like impose fines or like do the investigation part. Again, about this silent period, I think that from the government side, it is like more challenging. There should be the intervention from the the third parties, for example, investigative journalists. We saw the example in Slovakia, where actually on the election day there was this misconduct happened, and the journalist was the one who actually saved the day because the political parties have the restriction, they cannot speak about themselves. And for this post-election phase, where I'm more keen about this analysis part, I think the government does a lot by providing data. The governments are the largest data holders, and for example, in Latvia we have a register where you can see all the donation, all the spending of political parties, and you can use this data to make this, how you mentioned, the strategic plans. And the last thing that I will mention, maybe it's not so technological innovation, but what we did before this year's parliament election, taking into account the threat from this artificial intelligence and disinformation, we came up different stakeholders, and we make some kind of stress test and went through 5 different scenarios and divided by the institution who will react and how it will react. It's also resonate what Oskar said, that you need a plan to move forward. So,
are you happy with the result? How the application worked? Or how many Latvians downloaded and contributed?
I think that this application should be communicated more, and it works for the socially active voters. Of course, the persons who are not familiar with digital solution, they do not use it, but just in numbers, starting from the campaigning period in 10th of February till the parliament election, we received 50 some kind of reports that which we can actually use, where the information was qualitatively provided.
Okay, thank you. We in CHESNO developed similar app. It was called AdBuster. So the aim was to catch the outdoor advertisement, because in Ukraine it's a huge problem. And we expected that the young people or students, for them it would be interesting because it was gamification there, will be catching that ads. But actually what happened, that representatives of competing political parties were taking that photos, and they would like to be sure that all ads from the opponents is reported. So basically, sometimes we can design innovative solution, but we might not be sure who will actually use it. Okay, so we're moving to our next question. We can talk about gaps in moderating political content in social media. So, Oscar, probably we can start from you. What gaps, Oscar, I would ask?
I'm here, absolutely.
Yeah. What gaps do you see in the regulation of political content in social media? Or no
Well,
gaps?
I think it's important to actually start with what political content is, right? And probably acknowledging that there is no unified definition of what political content is. And there are discussions, among various forums, including EU institutions, of, how to approach specific regulation of political advertising or political speech and so on. But it's a long discussion. And I think observing it shows that it's really, really hard to agree on a common definition because as a society, we do define political actions very differently, right? Sometimes we can have a more narrower approach, sometimes broader, whatever. But this really leads, to the situation that we need to look through the lenses of, what is the harm that can be done, and probably, sometimes start from various harms and how to mitigate these harms as a probably quicker, more practical way to deal with it. As Meta, we do, we definitely do that. We do that both, at the level of like, how do you apply our technology to moderate content in general? How do we use the mix of automation and human review in order to both, carry operations at scale, but also to be able to treat appropriately cases that are very new and very nuanced, require a lot of societal, cultural, linguistic context, and where technology is probably not enough to make appropriate decisions, right? And also the way how we develop our policies internally in order to make sure that these policies are adhering to principles like the ones that we probably you all agree with, like human rights and other like core principles, but also that they do cater for specific situations that represent risks around the elections. For instance, we do have a number of specific electoral policies where we do not even assess against like humoristic context. So whenever there is a claim on our platform that says that elections are happening on Wednesday and in fact they're happening on Sunday, we would always take down this content, regardless of whether it was part of the cabaret of sorts, whether it was presented in a humoristic way, and so on and so forth, right? So there are very some specific situations. Now, your question was around the gaps in the regulatory framework. I think it's taking this question to the next level would be really a question of like whether there are contingencies that we do not anticipate that will happen, and probably there are, and that is why only by really working like in an ecosystem manner, we are able to do more, to fix these gaps much more by like on one hand, working systemically, so like developing solutions, like probably also developing our transparency ecosystems, working with other industry players on methods to more automatically and more efficiently label AI content in general, and so on and so forth, right? So these are the systemic solutions. But on the other hand, it is really about sharing information and sharing knowledge about some trends that we have not seen before, and making sure that there is an industry level response to these. And I think we do it more and more. And for instance, whenever we examine specific influence operations, we always do share this with the whole industry and authorities. Social media as such is such a broad territory, and fixing gaps in one territory, like let's say ours, does not necessarily mean that these harms will not be reflected somewhere else. And And that is why coordination is important. And here, I think, is the aspect for the regulation piece of conversation. Is like, to what extent regulation can be developed in a way that help industry players to coordinate better, to have more unified approach. And to be honest, I'm also, again, it's more of my, more of my point of view here, but definitely, we always acknowledge very and have some dedicated moment to focus on all the best practices developed by our partners. I'll be coming back to because IFES is actually presented here, so I'll be coming back to their own best practices that they presented in March. And when I read them for the first time, as an example of a soft regulation of sorts, right? I actually looked at these and say, okay, well, this is a great piece of like institutionalizing what we've been already exploring. And I've been like always wondering whether we should dedicate more time to train, electoral management bodies on to use our ad library API to monitor political ads, right? And whether they would be interested in actually exploring this area. So this soft regulation is actually allowing us to like have more, more courage as well, but more institutionalized approach to carrying these things. And I think these projects and these moves are actually fixing much more gaps than the hard regulation can fix, given the hard regulation is always, subject to lengthy discussions around how do we define specific social phenomena that are not that easy to be defined. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. But we are asking Meta about gaps, but actually we have Google in Ukraine who haven't provided any transparency information towards political advertisement yet, I mean. Anita, do you see any gaps in regulation, political and electoral content in social media?
Well, I think Oscar has covered a lot, but what I wanted to add that maybe the gaps are more not in the social media, but so-called social media bubbles, which lives in messaging platforms like WhatsApp and Telegram, where closed groups of persons are sharing content where the government cannot get an access. It cannot be monitored, it cannot be controlled, and it's like can be very easily spread around, and it could be like tactically spread to target groups. So I think that the largest gaps are there. The Facebook and Meta and even Google, maybe they can cover like more integrity and transparency, but this not talking about TikTok.
Okay, so that was I was saying that we are trying to regulate one area and another appears, like the Telegram, which is we have a lot of complaints on Telegram in Ukraine because of misinformation, Russian propaganda, and all that stuff. Magnus, would you like to tell something about gaps?
Sure. And I mean, a lot has already been covered, but I think the last point is very important. If we had this discussion 15 years ago, we would have been talking about how to regulate MySpace. No one's using MySpace anymore. 10 years, 15 years from now, we'll be talking about platforms that don't exist yet, and which may be by Meta, by companies that exist, but the platforms will certainly be different. So that needs to be borne in mind. Just some very quick points. But I think that there's nothing fundamentally different about political and election content on social media than in any other forum. But the speed with which information runs, the bubbles we were talking about, to some extent, the absence of an editorial control that might exist in other forums does mean that there are risks that we need to carefully consider. Just to briefly mention two main risks that we'll see in the issue of social media. Disinformation, obviously. We do see that very strongly around elections. Just to mention, IFES has the Crisis Communication and Disinformation Playbook, which is specifically for election management bodies, and has been field tested in a number with election commissions in specific elections. one being within the Commission in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where we see this very specific disinformation attacks on election processes, on election commissions, and on individual election commissioners as well. The other point I would highlight is the issue of hate speech. In relation to hate speech in relation to elections, so we see how elected officials, candidates, political parties, and civil society are both the potential purveyors and targets of hate speech. And women are more targeted by hate speech in political and electoral processes than men are. And in line with this, it is the responsibility of all actors, women and men alike, to forcefully, comprehensively address this issue immediately, also when the attack is on your opponent, which is an important point. Thanks.
Thank you, Magnus. Oscar, we are returning back to you.
Yep.
Okay. So I would like to know to what extent social media can influence the upholding electoral integrity.
Well, there are many aspects of that integrity, right? And again, just to be very, very clear, we are not interested in influencing anything, right? We are rather interested in preserving the integrity. But I'm pretty sure this is exactly the context we are talking about, right? So to a couple of earlier points, it is really about developing standards that, if and when appropriately applied, one of these standards is our community standards. The set of rules, 27 categories that are defined to really serve as a guidance, as a very transparent guidance for the users of the platform, but also for the platform to moderate the content. The other ones are advertising standards, including social issue, electoral, political ads, transparency guidelines or standards with its authorization regime. The other one would be standards around, for instance, specific electoral policies. And I think Magnus talked about like some instances of hate speech being targeted towards electoral officials. These days, we do have also a specific policy that actually is protecting electoral officials, members of electoral bodies, and so on, that we can apply very quickly, whenever these instances are happening. And this is a piece of learning, right? And that is yet another brick to the wall of integrity. And a couple of, and probably a great example of like fixing specific gaps that you alluded before. Just to maybe organize that answer a little bit better, I think there are like multiple layers where definitely platforms like ours are working day in, day out to ensure that we generally preserve integrity of the platform. And by preserving the integrity of the platform, whenever there is a political debate ahead of the elections happening, we also contribute heavily to preserving the integrity of the elections. Definitely, there are some spaces that we've been paying a specific close attention for the last couple of years. I talked a lot about political transparency, so I'll not develop it here further. But we also define very well the way how we tackle societal issues as misinformation and disinformation. I think here maybe just 3 seconds of like clarifications that. Again, I'm not pedantic, but it's important that we apply the right measures to the right harms. And with the way how we define misinformation is really the unintentional share of a piece of information that may be false. And of course, if it's harmful, it's subject to our community standards and probably taken down. But if it's not harmful and shared unintentionally, this is where our network of third-party fact checkers comes in, right? And the fact that we do maintain partnerships and of course also the whole ecosystem of them. We have 100 of them in the world, around 45 in Europe. They are able to fact check specific information if it's rated as false. We reduce the distribution of this information by around 80% on platform. So that's our specific strategy towards misinformation. We also, prohibit people from running ads with these falsely rated pieces and so on, with the pieces that are rated falsely as false. But again, we also distinct that phenomenon from disinformation, which is really a coordinated attempt to manipulate public debate for a strategic goal, where we rather rely on behavior of actors and we look for traces of inauthenticity, right? We, of course, differentiate between covert and overt operations. Overt would be more a presence of state-controlled media on a platform and their attempts to spread messages which were heavily limited after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, where we decided to prohibit absolutely specific media outlets from being present on the platform. But for covert ones, it's really our policies around CIB or coordinated authentic behavior networks, where we really look into specific behavioral signals, right? And to your question, just to end my probably elongated answer, I'm sorry for that. But it's another example of this multi-layered response where cannot always rely on some concepts that may be logical but not always true. Not always content is the best layer of analysis. Sometimes behavior is much better, right? And by developing our own tools and sharing with industry, how do we analyze behavior? How do we trace for trace of inauthenticity? This is exactly what is also the contribution to protecting the overall integrity of the info space, and simultaneously contribution to protecting the integrity of electoral processes as well.
Thank you for your answer. Thank you for meta position in that matter. Our panel was about threats and opportunities of digital component. Yeah, we were mainly talking about threats. Do you see any opportunities which digital bring to the election? Marcus.
Yeah, I think on balance, the digital developments are positive in terms of electoral integrity. We have been talking mainly about threats, like you say, and then that's what we do. But there are all these opportunities on the sides. They're not necessarily internet voting or electronic voting, but everything in terms of just communication within the process, the transfer of information, in particular, including election results, and in terms of campaigning. So if I work on the campaigning side, yes, use of online media and social media and campaigning creates challenges and threats in our monitoring. But man, how cheap it is. Compare that with having to take out very expensive TV adverts, which used to be the only way of reaching out effectively to voters. It's incredible. I think it creates massive opportunities for parties, candidates, including challengers, new forces, women, youth, persons with disabilities, to be able to reach voters in a way that simply wasn't possible 10 years ago. So thank you for asking that question, because it's very important that we see all the positive aspects of this as well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, you can outreach people for less than 1 cent. That never was possible before when we had rally and TV ads, as you were saying. Anita, do you see any opportunities?
Yes, I do. To elaborate more about this, the cost efficiency it brings, we had a new party which participated in a parliament election, and they used only TikTok to communicate. And they actually, when we rated the costs of the other parties who used radio, internet, and TV and other spaces, it was like the costs per candidate they got into the parliament was like a huge difference. So of course it is cost efficient, but the opportunity I also see from my daily job is the analytics. And now when we are trying to switch to this database decision making, and it's like crucial that we have available data and that we have these opportunities to work with this data to make the better conclusions, to target the right groups, to predict, to forecast yeah, I see these opportunities in analytical field.
And that party, did they get seats in the parliament?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. Oscar, what kind of opportunities do you see? I know that's main part of your job, creating digital opportunity, but still, for the elections.
Thank you for asking this question, really, because it is really important we see this balance. Like, very often we concentrate on only one side of it. And, I've been working in this sphere for last almost 10 years and daily working with political parties as well. Of course, we have a very strict service model, so we always, rely on like equitability of service, consistency of information flows, right? So we rather share the same information with everyone and so on. But what I really observe is to what was already shared. One, digital media in general, be it our platforms, be it not, they do offer opportunities for minorities, for underrepresented groups, for social groups that are not present in mainstream media very often for various reasons, right? To have their own space and voice, and to also make a statement, right, in the electoral process that very often leads to these groups being more and more represented, which is exactly what I believe is the idea behind the democracy as such. So that's definitely one. The second one is, if we think about elections as a like the main moment for democracies, right? It should be a super positive moment in general by design. And if it's such, what digital platform or social media in general can help with is to find some creative, innovative way to really offer, an inspirational and aspirational communication, which very often, good quality political communicators are offering. But more and more, and this is exactly what we like to see more and more, electoral management bodies and other, non-partisan groups are offering as well, just to reinforce the idea behind the democracy as a system, just to reinforce the idea about the importance of elections. And this is not that present in mainstream media, and I think we try to also, see how we can help these groups to be better communicators. For instance, for Central Eastern Europe, we always organize this yearly already, the Digital Awareness Day, where we really gather all the civil society partners and electoral management bodies to help brainstorm on like how to be better in inspirational, aspirational communication around the elections as such, right? And yes, of course, and thank you for sharing the observation around the analytical part of it. Like, generally, digital media allow for a much more transparent ecosystem of what happened. Like, that shows really what happened, right? And because this is, inherently rooted in the platforms, it's harder and harder to abuse that ecosystem, and that also should create, this positive spin around playing much more often by the rules versus not.
Okay, thank you, Oscar. So I think we see some opportunities, yeah? Not just because of price, not just because of outreach, but still I think we can't even guess what can happen in the future. Now we're talking about Telegram, but within, as you say, 1 year, it might die and something new will appear. So now we are moving to the Q&A section, and I will be happy to give floor to our participants. Let's help with the mic. I see 2 hands, yep. Please tell who you are and what you would like to know.
Thank you very much for this useful information. I am François Esquerra. I am fact-checker in Mexican media outlet Animal Político. And as you know, we had our elections some weeks ago. And as a fact-checker, what I could identify in these campaigns was something that we didn't speak in this panel, and it's about something that I consider a major threat, and it's about, when we talk about digital disinformation, we speak about the best way of communicating, and people get informed majority, if we, based on what a digital news report says, like majority of population, at least in Mexico, consumes digital media to be informed, more than 70% of the people. So we speak about everything that is on there. And the major threat that I could see as a fact checker is the disinformation not coming from false publications, false posts, but from candidates itself. Like, candidates lie. And I think they're taking advantage of this moment we are living in an post-truth environment, like to lie openly. And you have no regulation on candidates lying openly. We had some contents to that with Trump when Twitter took some. I understand it's difficult to regulate politicians, but I think it's the major threat. We are not saying, because even literature says that people believes in what politicians says, and maybe those posts are not as credible as the politicians itself. So what can we do in that area? We have to regulate how we can regulate, how platforms that have to take openly work to regulate politicians from lying. And that's my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you for a very interesting question. Who would like to answer? How to stop politicians from lying?
So there are two questions. One is how to regulate politicians lying, and one is how to stop them.
Regulate politician lying.
It's scary. First of all, it's difficult, as you say, but also dangerous. So who decides what is the truth? And in some contexts, sure, that may be doable. But in others, and in many contexts, I would be very worried. It's a little bit like, I'm not going to talk about that right now, but CNAB has a very particular model in terms of political finance oversight. They have powers that institutions anywhere else in Europe do not have, including in France. And that's great in Latvia. It would be terrifying in other parts of Europe, because the potentiality for misuse of those powers would be immense. And it's the same thing, drawing a parallel to what you're saying. I think the ultimate judge, and this is very glib, but the ultimate judge of when politicians are lying will have to be the voters. But that's not easy. How do we do it?
Yeah. Well, we are not deciding whether it's true or a lie, but what we see that the politicians, they are like common persons like you and me, and behind every politician there is like a bunch of professionals standing, giving advices, and it's usually are these PR agencies. And they are also, in Latvia, we saw an example that our politician then even hired a PR specialist from Germany and like other countries to come in Latvia and advise. And I think there is a potential room and work to do with these advisors, and like rising again this integrity and ethics, that you should speak truth. And the same, we also started to think as our institution what to do with this artificial intelligence. You can make a poster, and then you can say that, no, it wasn't me. It was generated by artificial intelligence. It's also a lie, but again, it's a room to avoid some scandalous episodes. And yes, I would say there is like no solution, but promote this integrity and ethics actually from the childhood.
So probably that is the next level of populism. Oscar, would you like to contribute what to do if politicians lying?
Yeah, just two observations here, and thank you for the question. So one is, as probably many of you know, yes, we do not fact-check political speech, but only if it's a first party for the political speech. So basically, if politician himself or herself is actually, offering a statement that may be false, we will not send it to our third-party fact-checkers, right? Because we, again, for the all right arguments, and some of them already have been surfaced here, we do not want to be the arbiter of truth. It's very dangerous. But at the same time, if a politician is sharing content that, is sharing content that is actually false, then we obviously, fact check it. If it's sharing content that is already rated as false, it will receive, reduced distribution. So all the same rules apply. Because, we should not allow politicians to share something that is false. If they want to produce that statement, that's absolutely another area where it's really, really hard to have that arbitrary position. But I think what is more important to this debate is really this aspect of digital literacy or media literacy in general, right? And I think all the efforts that probably should be even more coordinated than they are, because they are very often fragmented, and of course, each government and each platform and each non-profit operating in the info space has its own approach to this. But I think coordinated efforts, probably combined with educational curriculum from the very beginning of everyone's life, that is geared towards strengthening the muscle of critical thinking, is really the ultimate response, together with the response that already Magnus offered, which is around, yes, I mean, voters should decide ultimately, right? And if those voters are equipped with the right mental toolkit to analyze information critically, that's the great build-up for democratic process in general.
Thank you, Oscar. And we had one more question. We just have time for that.
Thank you very much. My name is Barbara Jouan-Stonestreet. I'm part of the IFES delegation, but I used to work for the French political finance regulator. I have a question for you, Anita. I'm really interested in this report to CNAB application that you developed a few years ago. And I would like to know if you can use the information provided through the application, I guess most of the time in a kind of anonymous manner, to launch an investigation, or whether you have to link up this information to information that you already have, like, for instance, suspicions of irregularities. And the second part of my question is, if you could tell us the proportion of investigations launched on the basis of complaints that you received through the application vis-à-vis the ones that you launched on the basis of irregularities that your political finance unit flagged during the verification process.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question. Well, you see that first of all, we start with administrative level. We do not launch like criminal investigation based on this information. Our division, who is responsible for the controlling of political party financing, they start the administrative process. And yes, the information provided via this application can be used as any other like typical anonymous report that you receive via post or via email. It's in an administrative process. If the allegations and this information contains like more, how to say, dangerous level of threat, then the criminal investigation can be started, and there is like a additional level that you need to secure the proof, and then we have to cross-check with our information. We have to do the searches and other like criminal proceedings, but for the administrative purpose, the application works very well. And in the end of the previous year, we extended the use of this application, and we launch additionally that the whistleblowers can also report via this application and even anonymously. So, like, how to say, we started only for this pre-election campaign, and then it developed even for the like wider range of use.
I think, Anita, you can continue your conversation during the break. So we have the last seconds of our meeting. Thank you for your participation. Thank you, Oscar, for being with us and presenting meta position at this panel. Again, there are, I think, more opportunities than threats in the digital part of the election. Thank you.